Alright everybody, so to continue where we left off with part 1, that's unit 4, practice 1, part 1, we are on part 2. So for the last part, we created these letters, we put them all on their own layers, we customized the colors and styles, and then we turned them all into symbols. So we have a J symbol, an M symbol, a P symbol, and a U symbol in alphabetical order because why not? And today we're going to animate them. So you should have done everything on frame 1. If you didn't, that's not the end of the world. You can just copy them, move them over to frame 1. So our first step is we are going to create some classic tweens. And we've done maybe a little bit of tweening before. Maybe you've done it before in the past in other classes. But today we are going to go ahead and make ourselves some keyframes at the 1 second mark, which is frame 30. We're going to insert keyframes, which is F6 on your keyboard. And now we have 1 second of animation. Except of course nothing's happening yet because we haven't actually made any new keyframes. But before we make any new keyframes, we want to go ahead and add our tweens. And for this, what we're going to do is we're going to select all 4 of our layers on frame number 1, so they're all selected. We're going to right click and create classic tween. The other thing you can do is select all 4 layers on frame 1, come up here to this button that looks like some squares with an arrow. Click that button and that will create a classic tween for you as well. So what you'll notice with the classic tween is that now all of your layers are purple and they have an arrow starting from your first keyframe and going all the way to your last keyframe, like so. So the way classic tweens work is you set the classic tween and then you set keyframes where you want your key actions to occur, and then Adobe Animate does all your in-betweens for you. So now that we have these classic tweens, let's start animating. We're going to start at frame number 20, select all 4 layers, hit F6 to create a keyframe. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change my zoom to fit in window so I can see the whole stage. And on frame number 20, I'm going to select all 4 of my letters and I'm going to put them up here. Okay, now if I go back to frame 1, you can see that they move up and they come back down. Because using our classic tweens, we have told Adobe Animate on frame 1, I want the letters at the bottom. On frame 20, I want them at the top. And on frame 30, I want them back down at the bottom. And using some very basic math, Adobe Animate has said, okay, we'll go from point A to point B, back to point A. So in order to make this look a little bit more appealing and natural, we're going to select each letter separately here on frame 20 and just kind of move them apart. And if you're noticing that your Adobe Animate does this snapping thing and you don't like that, go to your properties window, go over to the dock button and deselect this snap to objects. And this will allow you to move your objects however you want. So I'm going to move these apart and out like that. and then play the animation to see how it looks. So by moving the letters apart and kind of changing which ones are taller or which ones jump higher than others, we have created some appeal. We're avoiding twinning, which is where everything moves at the same rate, at the same time, going to the same place. Okay, so there's the first part of our animation. And now we're going to add some squash and stretch. So we're going to go to frame number 5. Once again, select all layers, add yourself a keyframe. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create our anticipation frame by doing some squash. One letter at a time. I'm going to squash these suckers down using my free transform tool, or Q on the keyboard. I'm going to squash these suckers down so that they look like they are about to jump. Squash it down. It's okay if they overlap a little bit. Squash them down. Make sure that they are still sitting on the ground, otherwise it's going to look a little bit funky. If you're not sure, don't remember where the ground was, remember you can always use your onion skinning tool and see the ground is there and this is here, so I need to make sure that these are on the ground. Okay, so we got a squash in there. Looks good. Now, one thing that you'll learn about classic tweens is that they're not very smart. They only know as much information as you give them. So we have told the classic tween on frame 1, I want everything to be the same, nothing squashed or stretched. On frame 5, everything needs to be squashed. And on frame 20, everything needs to be in the air. So just again, having Animate do basic math, it decides, okay, you want them squashed on frame 5, and you want them unsquashed and in the air on frame 20. So at the moment, on frame 10, they are both squashed and in the air, which of course is not at all how it works. So let's add in squash's best friend, which is stretch. So we're going to go to frame 15, select all 4, F6 for keyframe, and we're going to use the free transform tool again, one letter at a time, to stretch our letters out. Remember, if they stretch up, they've got to stretch in, scunch in. And again, at this point, you know, you can change, you can do some offsetting, change how close together or how high they are. And that's going to give us a little bit more, stretch there. Then we are going to go to frame 25, which is the halfway point between the top and the bottom-most action. And we're going to stretch them again, set our keyframes. This time we're going to give them a lot more stretch because we want it to appear like they're falling quickly. And for this one, I'm also going to do a little bit of skewing. Skewing is where you take the edges rather than the top or the sides, and you can skew them along an axis. So we're going to skew these to give them a little bit more movement. And let's see what we've got so far. All right, it's looking pretty good. We've got a good amount of squash and stretch. We've got our anticipation frame. We've got our jump. We hit the top. We come back down. And it cycles. Whoop, not that one. This one. So once we have our full loop going, you can see that it goes from a regular frame to an antic frame. We've got the jump, the stretch, hits the top, stretches back down, hits the bottom, loops back into the antic frame. So now we have a full jump animation. We're going to do one last thing before we export this out, and that is we're going to add offset. We did a little bit of that when we moved the individual layers, letters here. We offset the spacing, sorry. We offset the spacing, which is good. It looks visually good. Now we want to offset the timing. Because if you have a bunch of people standing together and you all jump at one time, it's very unlikely that you're all going to jump at exactly the same time. It's going to look really unnatural if you do that. So just to add a little bit more appeal, just to add a little bit more organic quality, we're going to offset some of the timing. And to do that, we're just going to move some keyframes over. So I'm going to take on my U, I'm going to take frame 20 and frame 25, and I'm just going to scoot them over by one. And on my P, I'm going to take 15 and 20, scoot them back by one. Maybe scoot U up one, scoot J back one. And now, everything feels a little bit more organic. There's more appeal there because it looks like a more realistic movement. So, now that we've got this, all we need to do is export it out and we will be done. So as a reminder, never try to save or export anything with the with anything playing. That is a recipe for disaster. It will absolutely crash your Adobe Animate. So make sure nothing is playing. Then we want to go up to File, we're going to Export, and we're going to export an animated GIF. For this specific assignment, we want to make sure transparency is turned off, and we want our height to be 300, which will make our width 533 by default. Looks good. Oop. One more thing, we want to change this from art optimized to type optimized. Go ahead and save it out. This is 2. And you're done. So we have completed practice number 1. We've learned a bit more about the text tool. We've learned about the ink bottle tool, the gradient transform tool, and we've sort of dipped our toes into classic tweening, which is the easiest out of all the types of tweens that we're going to be working with. All right, that's it for practice number 1, part 2. I will see you again.